This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Two weeks ago, at the first annual Icarus Fest, we were able to bring together many of the leading dissident journalists to talk about the war on Ukraine, the rapidly changing world order, and what it means to do journalism when the entire media is doing the work of the government. This is my interview with Max Blumenthal, Aaron Maté, Michael Tracey, Clint Russell, and Sam Husseini at Icarus Fest. Well, we are here for the Gray Zone Day at Icarus Fest 2023, and we're joined by an incredible all-star lineup here. These are basically my favorite journalists covering the Ukraine war, U.S. foreign policy, geopolitics. I follow these guys on a daily basis. This is quite an honor for me and really quite thrilling to get to talk to them all at the same time, and you do too. So we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this panel discussion. And then this very same group returns tonight after we watch The Unredacted. We'll be back in this room after the film. We'll be adding Meg Smaker to this room, to this panel, but I think we do have enough room on the stage. So there's going to be a lot of time we have today with these guys, and so please think about what questions you'd like to ask at the end, and we'll do it. So let me introduce these amazing people. So over on the right there, on the far side there, we have Michael Tracey, the independent journalist, investigative reporter, essential reading on Twitter and Substack, I would say.
Especially Twitter.
He's the king.
Backhanded compliment in the world.
Now, fellas. Sam Husseini, another independent investigative journalist and reporter who's been doing incredible work on especially the lab, and this is crucial, we now call it the lab origin thesis, and this is actually Sam's idea about the nomenclature there, and we'll talk about that later about why that's important, but Sam has been doing amazing work on that, and we're going to have a whole panel on that at 2 o'clock in this room, and I really strongly recommend that because Sam has been blowing my total mind lately with all sorts of stuff, and even things about RFK Jr. that I didn't know about, that you'll find out about today, which are quite amazing. So I'm so glad Sam's here. Thank you, Sam. Then we have from the Gray Zone, and this is the Gray Zone Day, so honored to have the Gray Zone co-sponsoring Icarus Fest. We have Max Blumenthal, the editor, Gray Zone. Do you have a title at the Gray Zone, Aaron? Just, you're just a Gray Zone guy. The Canadian. He's the Canadian, the Gray Zone. Aaron Maté probably doesn't need too many introductions because, you know, he's an award-winning journalist, so, but which is highly deserved. It's kind of amazing that you do have any awards given the state of our media. They tend not to like people like you know, Canadians. They don't like Canadians. And then Clint Russell of the Liberty Lockdown podcast, who a lot of libertarians have not been so fabulous on the Ukraine war from our perspective and probably from your perspective, but not this guy. So he's been doing relentless, consistent, outstanding, top-notch reporting and journalism on it. He has many people on his show who have been very important in this struggle, I would say, the struggle to talk about this war across the world that most Americans, I don't think even are aware is going on. I mean, you know that most Americans don't read the news at all, right? I mean, and then most Americans couldn't identify Ukraine on a map. Have you seen the scattershot map? You know, they did this survey of thousands of Americans, gave them a blank map of the world and asked them to identify Ukraine, and it's like most of them put it in South America or the South Pacific or the Arctic Circle or in Washington, D.C., which was sort of appropriate. So, I mean, this is what we're up against, right? I mean, most Americans don't even know that this country exists, that this thing is happening. And then for the 10% or so of Americans who do know about it, and this is what we're really up against, you know what you're supposed to say. In the mass media in the West, you're not allowed to deviate from the prescribed narrative from the State Department about what is actually happening and what the role of the United States is. So I've been studying this war since it started, February 24th of last year, every single day, because it became very clear to me right away that this was momentous, that the world is going to change when it started, and that's exactly what's happened. So we've had a massive realignment, as I'm sure most of you know, the emergence of BRICS as a serious contender in geopolitics, the new non-alignment movement, I would call it, which is one country after another every week joining this new alliance led by China and Russia. What does that mean? We don't know yet, but we do know the world is now a different place. It is a fundamentally different place than the one I grew up in. So I wanted to start off by asking all these guys, beginning with the gray zone fellas, what it's been like just personally to talk about this war, to cover it, to make analyses of it that are not considered appropriate in the media. Have you lost friends? How many times have you been called a Putin stooge? Do you find it is impossible or difficult to reach out beyond your own audiences to convince people or show people what this war is about? Aaron, I'm wondering, how has it been for you personally? Because you come from, even more recently than me, I'm an old leftist journalist, and I used to be a part of those media organizations and those organizations themselves. I used to be a member of DSA. I wrote for The Nation a long time ago. You did too more recently, Democracy Now!, you worked there. And clearly much of the left, even that left, is more or less buying the narrative. How has it been for you to say the things you've been saying about Ukraine, about this war, given your recent past?
Well, to me, the friend break happened with Russiagate, when those of us who didn't go along with this fear-mongering campaign about a sweeping Russian influence effort and a Trump campaign conspiracy, we already were pushed to the margins, and that's when I lost the friends that I had in the progressive left. And so this Ukraine war was just a new phase of that, and yeah, I still can't believe that people I used to work with and the overall progressive movement in general, as personified by Bernie Sanders, are totally in lockstep with neocons. It still hasn't sunk in. It blows my mind, because ultimately this is a proxy war that stands against everything that I think progressives are supposed to believe in, and empowers all these agendas that go against everything I thought the left stood for. So it's just been strange. It's been surreal. I can't believe there's not one member of Congress who calls himself progressive who can find the minimal courage, decency to vote no for arming Ukraine and fueling a neocon proxy war. There's not one single person. It's just a very surreal time.
Max, why is that? You're a man of the left. You know the left. You've studied it. Why, and I'd actually like to hear from all of you about this, why is Amy Goodman, of all people, basically towing the line of the State Department?
You mean the hippie Rachel Maddow?
Yes.
Aaron worked with her. Aaron can speak to her.
The left generally. I mean, and in Europe it's even worse.
Yeah, I have my theories, and they're not coherent. My break with, or when parts of the left started to viciously assault me like a bunch of rabid, tattooed 7-year-olds. No offense to anyone with tattoos here. I'm not against all people with them. I just mean, it was like the hipster Brooklyn left was over Syria. They had been worked into a frenzy over saving the children of Syria. And they had, I started to realize within the left there was this dominant strain in all of this money that had been pumped in, foundation money to support Trotskyism and a kind of a perverse form of Marxism that actually supported imperialism over decades on the grounds that we need continuous revolution everywhere, and that the left's dominant mentality was just a constant hysteria about everything and the way things were, and that we just need to shut shit down. Shut it down. That's why they all got it so into lockdowns, because lockdowns were, let's just shut this shit down. We need to mask up and lock down and shut it down. It was like, and so let's shut Assad down. Let's shut Putin down, because all of these bad dictators need to be shut down. And, we'll shut down the police here too. It's like this lack of thinking. And so I actually started to gravitate more toward the Marxist-Leninist wing of the left, because Lenin's understanding of imperialism and implementing a system to fight it actually was one of the most cogent responses to what a country like Syria was facing at the time. And it all started to kind of make sense to me without me becoming a Marxist-Leninist. At least I found a wing in the radical left that could make sense of the world, but then they immediately adopted the China solution to COVID, that wing of the left. They wanted to they literally wanted people in white perception management suits to be handing Velveeta cheese and government vegetables to people in their welded-in apartment buildings continuously for the rest of humanity in order to prevent an aerosolized virus from getting around. And therefore, they blacklisted me and boycotted me, and they defriended me. People who I would have dinner with every week treated me like I was Roy Cohn. And I've never spoken to them since. And the left has been hopelessly divided. And those same people, when we tried to unite the gangs like Cyrus from the Warriors at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, they campaigned against us, attacked us, and said, these are anti-vaxxers and all,
And racist.
And racist, whatever. Yeah,
Mostly
white
you.
supremacists, and they need to have neurodivergent people on stage, and because they too could die in a nuclear war. But they can't. The neurodivergent people can't be Kanye West because he loves Hitler. So, but you understand what I'm saying. So the left just got totally crazy. It cannot deal with what's happening right now, and we live in a psyopathy. And the most important thing we can do is try to think through these issues together and not be hysterical and reflect on what's being done to us, the cognitive warfare that's being waged on us. And I, wound up kind of doing these live streams with Aaron, because even though Aaron didn't really agree with me privately on the COVID event, at least initially, he was willing to think through these issues in a kind of calm and rational way and be a journalist. And so that's just what we're going to do at the Gray Zone.
You guys commit journalism on a regular basis. Is this something just that's who you are, or what is that? Why do you care about journalism so much?
Well, I created after I guess, is this online? Is this going online, or is this all private?
Yes, sir. People will know about this.
Fuck
yes.
it, man. There was a fake Me Too scandal at Alternet where the Gray Zone was. Just Me Too brought down all the institutions that I had been a part of in the progressive left, because, hysteria reigns. And so all these senior men were in charge of these institutions that had supported, my book Goliath, for example. And then staffers got together, made some accusations, and those institutions crumbled overnight. The Nation Institute, Alternet, Truth Dig, what else? The Real News. All of the progressive institutions crumbled overnight.
I like how all these institutions happen to have been run by sexual predators this entire time, these left-wing mainstream institutions. They're just breeding grounds for the most depraved sexual acts, apparently.
I mean, it was like Plato's retreat when you'd walk into the Nation Institute office. No, but for real, I'm not going to weigh in on the allegations, but the institutions all crumbled under a moral panic that played out almost exclusively within the media and not within any institution where the working class existed. And so we were left out on our ass at the Gray Zone. We had been hosted at Alternet, and I just started it as a WordPress site. One day I started a Patreon, and I said, all right, here we go. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm on my own now. I didn't have any institutional backing anymore because of the whole first Palestine and then Syria. So it just took off. And, now, I mean, you see the destruction of WikiLeaks, the destruction of all of those prior institutions. We are pumping out articles relying on leaked information that other outlets are afraid to deal with or are incapable of synthesizing and analyzing through journalists like Kit Clarenberg, who was recently detained and interrogated by British counter-terror police for these kinds of reports. And so we're trying to follow in the footsteps of, or continue the legacy of alternative and independent media that challenges power in the way that WikiLeaks has, or in the way that old alternative media used to in the early 1970s at its inception. And again, it started as a WordPress site, but because of you all, I think we're a force to be reckoned with, and they're trying to take us down.
I think pretty much every week I see something that you guys break, not just report on, that you won't see anywhere else. And Aaron, you've actually said that. That's why you said you're proud to work for the Gray Zone, because you're just doing stuff and you're doing really sort of regular journalism, regular reporting. It's just that you're asking questions you're not supposed to ask. And you guys are not afraid to do that, and especially on the left, that's really remarkable. The left, and this your story about the Me Too movement really decimating a lot of left institutions, I've heard you tell that before. I really, at some point, I want to sit down and do that whole story, because that seems to me momentous. I
mean, you can see Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby like being like super predators, not in the Hillary Clinton sense of super predators, but sexual predators. You can see it; they just exude that, But then it was like Garrison Keillor, like in NPR voice.
Prairie
an American
Companion was another hotbed for sexual predation.
Yeah. At an antique roadshow event 19 years ago, Garrison Keillor brushed a woman's buttocks with the back of his hands. And this is Terry Gross, and we're reporting live from a quaint saltwater taffy factory in New England on Garrison Keillor and his predations.
Not time for a folk song to accompany the allegation.
It just started getting a little weird, but anyway.
So we now know the old left was full of rapists, and we also know, though, that the left is, and this is not news to anybody, of course, the left has been obsessed with identity politics for decades now. I mean, seemingly to the exclusion of all other issues. And maybe is that just it? They only care about things like race and gender and sexual assault, real or imaginary? I mean,
I think that's part of it. But I also think it's a bit of a misconception to assume that how the, quote, left has been operating vis-a-vis the Ukraine war is really that much of a stark deviation from their past lineage. I mean, people don't really have a great understanding of how the left comported itself in and around World War II, for instance. But just in this past week, I was reading the archives of The Nation magazine, and the editor-in-chief at the time, Frida Kirchwey, put out a diatribe in, I think it was early 1942, demanding that the Roosevelt administration more aggressively censored the press. That's right. She wanted the, quote, fascist press entirely censored, because what she was saying people don't understand is that this is an all-out information war that requires setting aside whatever kind of starry-eyed principles we might have adhered to in the past. And that was the flagship publication of the left at the time. So, of course, there's a cyclical process here where censorship becomes less fashionable and then more fashionable given the circumstances changing. But it's not like it's some unknown attitude that they've taken.
I'll double down on that. So during World War II, the Communist Party, which at that time was a major force in American politics, had maybe 1 million or so fellow travelers and members all combined. They not only supported censorship during the war, they also supported Japanese internment. The CPUSA, look it up. So yes, there's a long, thank you for bringing this up. There's a long,
Bill Browder's grandfather's leadership?
yes, Earl Browder.
Yeah.
Earl Browder, yes. So there's a long history of the left complying with the state's demands.
Right, and the left is not inherently anti-war either. There have been times when the left has been the most fervently pro-war. That's also typically the case today, although they're now commingled with like the hard right of Poland and Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and stuff in having this conformist view of the need to more aggressively intervene in Ukraine.
And the progressive left in World War I also, again, this is just even a longer history, like overwhelmingly supported intervention in World War I. I mean, which everyone acknowledges is just a killing field for imperialist nations. So yes, this goes way back. Now the Vietnam War, things changed a little bit, right? This is when the left emerged that we all know about, and that's why we think today of the left as being anti-war, but that was actually an exception in the history of the left.
Yeah, and here's how the current circumstances align with maybe the pre-Vietnam War circumstances. In 2016, August of 2016, Hillary Clinton gave a speech where she outlined her view of Russia and its relationship to Trump for like basically the first time in a comprehensive way. And she described Putin as the grand godfather of global extremism. That phrase is seared into my memory, including her cackle and her like beady-eyed recitation of it. And ever since that point, it's been just an article of faith and an organizing principle among not just the liberal, center-left Democrats who might have been the more hardline constituency for Hillary Clinton, but the broader expanse of the left liberal class had nothing to really disagree on in terms of that depiction of Putin. It was a uniting description among that cohort of the American electorate, and that's informed their view of things ever since. So if the next incarnation of Hitler really is the personage of Putin, and people believe that with utmost sincerity, then they feel obliged ideologically and historically to support whatever pro-war measures are required to blunt the blitzkrieg of this modern-day Führer. So I mean, it makes actually makes sense in terms of its internal coherence, which is why I'm kind of past the point of being mystified that the quote left seems to be taking on these pro-war positions. I now kind of view it as fairly consistent with a particular lineage that maybe just had been muted for a while in terms of this sort of cyclical recurrence.
To complete the history, but this is very important, it's directly relevant to what's happening now. So the Iraq War, 2003, Iraq 2, I guess we call it, we did see the left in huge numbers get out into the streets, and I was there, and I know a lot of these guys, all these guys were here there too. But then what happened, right? As soon as Obama gets elected, it evaporates overnight. There's actually been studies done showing that people with left-wing identifications just stopped going to anti-war rallies entirely with Obama. Because, of course, he didn't actually go to war. I mean, he didn't kill anybody, did he?
No one.
Because he's black, and black people are virtuous at all times.
We talk constitutional law.
Right, that's right.
Funny story. First time I met Max, he told the group of us sitting at a table that that's exactly what was going to happen. He said Obama was a phony who was there to neuter the left, and that's people didn't like hearing that. I didn't like hearing that at the time.
Well, it was all nation staffers.
Yeah,
they didn't like
no.
And but that turned out to be exactly what happened.
I think that it's almost more insidious than that, because you had in February 15th, 2003, a global peace movement, or at least an anti-war movement, at least quasi-global, and the quote-unquote peace movement in the ensuing years created Obama, in a sense. Their major protests against Bush and for peace happened in late summer or early fall of each of the following election years, 2004, 2006, 2008. So in a sense, the peace movement capitulated itself and paved the way to integrate what could have been a grand and earth-shattering global movement into an appendage of the Democratic Party, paving the way for Obama.
Wow.
So in a sense, I don't see it as Obama betrayed the peace movement. I believe, I look at it as the anti-war movement betrayed its own principles and paved the way for the worst possible Obama.
Why?
Wait, there was Obama's speech too in Hyde Park, which was really important in bringing the progressive left around to Obama. And it was written for him by anti-war activists, where he called Iraq a dumb war.
Right.
And he also campaigned, but he also campaigned in 2008 on escalating in Afghanistan. It's not like it was a pure-hearted anti-war platform in the first place.
And he called for renewing American leadership in an article in Foreign Policy, or Foreign Affairs.
Right. And what I think Obama clearly did, and I think that we on the anti-war left have to take some responsibility for this, we have cancel culture now. I should have doubled and tripled down harder on canceling everybody behind the Iraq WMD thing. I tried hard. I should have tried harder. And that helped pave the way for Obama to give a soft landing for empire in the aftermath of the Iraq War, to juice up the Afghan War, paving the way for Libya and so on. Libya, and under Clinton you had Yugoslavia with Albright. So this pro-war strand in the progressive circles has a litany here.
You've been directly involved in the anti-war movement in Washington D.C. for decades, for as long as I have. So you know those people, right? Why? Why did they fold so easily?
And also, Sam, you sent me a few months ago a clip of yourself questioning Joe Biden. I think it was in 2007 on the presidential campaign trail when he was running in that cycle. And then Antony Blinken scurries up to you and tries to give you some kind of clarification as to what Biden's stance is on his latest kind of harebrained scheme to what partition Iraq, I think, on ethnic lines. That was Joe Biden's actual plan at the time. And Antony Blinken, he was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as the senior staffer when they were giving all these pro-Iraq war decrees and putting out tracts and reports and everything. Have you heard anyone even bring that up about that tandem recently?
No. And I used to go to the Sunday morning talk shows and question these politicians as they walked out. And one day I got Biden, and I questioned him about, Biden was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee during the buildup of the Iraq invasion. And he kept people who were critics of the war, Ritter was just the most prominent, but there were many others, off of that. And I questioned him on that. He gave the tersest possible answer and then walked away when I tried to do a follow-up. And then Blinken got between me and him, lied to me 3 times in 30 seconds. One lie every 10 seconds about the nature of those hearings, claiming that no, we did look into that during those hearings. We did do that during those hearings. It was complete bullshit. Wow. Now I'm going to the State Department briefings when I can. Yeah. And trying to. And
I hope you all watch Sam's the videos when he goes and tries to jump the State Department spokespersons. It's quite a show. Clint, I'm going to get to you because I'm dying to know what you're thinking here. Because he's the only person here who's not of the left, by the way. So he has nothing to apologize for, because libertarians have been, except for the handful around Ukraine, generally speaking, much more consistently anti-war than the left has over the years. But Sam, I really want to.
That's right. We're the real anti-war.
You're the real deal, dude. The OGs. Can you offer a theory about why these people suck?
There's different.
the anti-war movement.
The anti-war movement.
Your friends.
You're talking about people like Leslie Kagan and Phyllis Bennis. Some of whom were against the February 15th, 2003 protests. They voted against it, and it was other grassroots activists. It started in Europe, and then grassroots activists in the United States basically forced their hand to participate in that. So they clearly have a preference for, and Leslie Kagan is former CP. Correct me if you know this world better than I do.
Communist Party, for those.
And
no relation to Bob, Kimberly, and Fred Kagan.
Not the Kagans.
No.
This is C.
No,
Kagan
with
a
C,
right? Yeah.
Maybe somewhere back in the shtetl, like
they all came. The neocons all came from the same shtetl in Poland.
Yeah, I think it's a nationalist. Blinders. Is this is
part
of it.
I try to be. that's what I'm wondering, is if they have somehow internalized, right, identification with the nation state and actually deep down inside sort of psychologically want American hegemony, right? I mean, they're maybe scared of a world dominated by Putin, or as they imagine it, or Xi, or whatever, right? I mean, is that it? They're really deep down Americans and therefore maybe American exceptionalist?
I think that that's certainly part of the psychological strain here. I feel that.
Well, they have a messianic impulse. That's part of the
That
whole
too.
left-wing kind of fundamental theology, if you want to put it that way. And if they can use the apparatus of the state to help enact their messianic impulses, then they're going to seize that opportunity. I mean, it makes perfect sense in terms of its internal coherency.
That's
But
right.
you can see it with the shift in terms of the propaganda, too, when it comes to the warmongering. It's like, now we're more concerned about gay rights in these countries that we blow up.
Yes.
And that appeals to the left. It doesn't so much appeal to the right. But I think that I actually have more sympathy for the average, Democrat voter than probably these guys do, because they come from that world and they're like, they look at them as Judases almost, whereas I look at them as my enemies anyway. So I'm like, I expected you guys to suck. But I have more sympathy because I feel like the PSYOP mill has been spun up so aggressively against the left in particular for the past 15 years. I mean, longer than that, but in particular since the Occupy Wall Street movement. I saw the Tea Party and the Occupy folks, which I would probably find myself more politically aligned with the Tea Party folks because I want to diminish the size of the state as opposed to social safety nets and all that. But once that happened, I think that there was a real chill that went up the spine of high finance, and I come from the finance world, so I think that's why I understand this really, like, intrinsically. They realized that the populist left in particular was a far greater danger to the titans of finance, and I have no affinity for the titans of finance because I was a private mortgage broker, the people that make their grift off of their relationship to the central bankers of the world. I have no concern for their well-being, and as far as I'm concerned, Occupy Wall Street can take them down. I don't care.
I thought libertarians loved all capitalists. What do you mean?
No, that's a misunderstanding as to our perspective. I understand why you believe that, though, because there are some libertarians.
I don't.
Yeah,
But most people do.
Some libertarians do actually defend all corporations and things like that, which I think we're waking up. But anyways, so that PSYOP starts to happen where they implement ESG and diversity, equity, and inclusion, the executive order in August of 2011 by Barack Obama, which makes the diversity, equity, and inclusion department in every single federal institution. That is enormous. And because they are now appealing to the left in their own language, they get them to essentially back down. You then have the Russiagate psychological operation that gets rolled out. You then have the COVID psychological operation that gets rolled out, and the war in Ukraine too. So for that reason, I'm more sympathetic to the position that they're in. However, I pray every day that they wake up and they realize that their entire foundation is predicated on lies.
Wow. All right, let's get down to brass tacks. Well, go ahead, Max.
I just wanted to weigh in on your last point. Isn't today Pride?
Well, there's
Every day this month.
Every day is.
Isn't the last?
No, but the Pride Parade in D.C. is today.
The one in New York is later.
Every gay, lesbian, and self-identified queer person who opposes the war state should be protesting Pride in D.C. They should be like blockading it because it's one float after another of weapons contractors and merchants of death.
Shut up.
Raytheon, the Lockheed Martin float, the BAE Systems float, then the cops march in it. And to participate in that is to participate in the co-optation of an identity and many other identities layered on top of it with other identities layered on top of it that to me, I don't even know how they got there, like asexual. I don't know how that got in there. In order to advance and render resilient against internal critique this imperial system of endless war and military Keynesianism, the war economy, which fuels DC, which fuels the gentrification. And so you ask, do these people, is their real fear the loss of America in the face of Putin? No. They have a particular view of the U.S. and they're first fighting to consolidate their control. That's what the indictment's about. That's what Russiagate was about. And it's about consolidating the hegemony of the pride flags that fly over 30 Rock, over the American flags that fly over double-wide trailers in the Rust Belt of Trump voters. That's their new flag. And it's not a flag of identification with the gay struggle. That's not what it's about. It's just something they chose, along with the Ukraine flags they put on their house when they come into a black neighborhood and start gentrifying it, or the Black Lives Matter sign they put on their lawn as a substitute for telling their neighbors, "We're sorry, we doubled your rent." It's a substitute for the American flag because they fear, first and foremost, nationalism. So consider the words of Jamie Raskin. Putin is a what did he say? He's a homophobic bigot and fascist racist, and that's why we need to fight this war in Ukraine. So those flags and the corporate DEI agenda, it's a distillation of what elite American liberals seek to export abroad at the barrel of a gun, or by sanctioning 1/3 of the world and actually starving brown children to death.
All of Bethesda, Maryland roared with applause when Raskin said that.
Yes, exactly. And so why do we feel so angry about the Democrats? Like, because we grew up in this shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's where I'm from. I'm from Tacoma, D.C. The other side of Tacoma, D.C. on the Maryland side was Jamie Raskin's district. And it used to be an anti-war district. Now everyone has Ukraine flags because they're fighting against nationalism and for the control of this perpetual war state.
I just want to make one point about this because I think it's crucially important, actually. I think in some ways this actually explains why the Ukraine war is happening. Do you all remember about 10, 15 years ago when sort of just regular normie liberals who watch CNN started talking for the first time about Vladimir Putin? This is when they first found out about him. Do you remember this? All of a sudden they started talking about Putin because the media was just pumping out Putin stories. Do you remember what was the first thing that all those people who vote and watch those shows and have so much political power knew about Vladimir Putin? The first and only thing was that he was homophobic. And that's why they hated him. And then a few years later, they find out that he's responsible for Donald Trump. Well, now, that's all we need to know. We'll go to war with that bastard, right? And that's, I'm telling you, the PSYOP demonizing Putin over the last 20 years, I think, and this is saying a lot, I understand that, I think it might be the most effective psychological operation ever conducted by the United States. Because it has that entire population on psychological lockdown. There is no deviation of thought on this. They know Putin is evil, and therefore any war against him is justified and necessary.
I had Cory Booker, the senator from the great state of New Jersey that we're now so honored to be sitting in, tell me personally.
Can you do a land recognition?
Lenape, I don't know. I have some incense if you need it. I had Cory Booker tell me directly, bluntly, that part of the reason why he felt it was so imperative and unswervingly necessary to support U.S. policy in Ukraine is as vengeance for the 2016 election interference that Putin orchestrated to install Trump in power. He told it to me directly. And that seems to have been the subtext for a lot of the reason why there's such fervency in the Democratic Party and kind of the progressive circles in supporting the policy status quo. But they don't always say it so overtly because it's a little weird. But I have that on the record, so that'll be out.
There's a great clip from Gray Zone this week. But who was it that confronted Jamal Bowman? Was it Liam who did it?
Yeah, our new DC correspondent, Liam Cosgrove.
So Liam Cosgrove confronts Jamal Bowman and Jamal Bowman is a member of the squad. And he just asked him very politely, why did you vote to fund the Ukraine proxy war multiple times? And Jamal Bowman, first of all, he's not happy about being questioned about this. He's like, why are you questioning me? You should be questioning one of these pro-war politicians. And Liam's like, well, you voted for this, so I think you're worthy of being questioned. And he's basically, and so Jamal Bowman is able to articulate, he's like, I know this war is all about the military-industrial complex. It's all about imperialism. And so he recognizes that, but he also says, Putin's a madman. Putin's a madman. We have to fight him. It's so incoherent. But the fact that this progressive member of Congress who ran against a neocon, I mean, who did he defeat? It was Elliot Engel, like one of the biggest neocons in the Democratic Party, can then turn around and then emulate all of Engel's policies or many of his policies while still speaking the rhetoric of an anti-imperialist in some ways. It speaks to the complete incoherence of this time.
It also speaks to the power of the American religion, which I've said since the founding has been the belief that America should run the world. And that goes back to the founding fathers. Contrary to popular belief, they were all committed to a global empire, every single one of them. Adams, Washington, Jefferson, every single one of them said this repeatedly, even Franklin, even before the Revolution, every single one of them. And that certainly continued on forward through American history. You could not hold national elective office without obeying that belief. I mean, you had to believe that America should be the hegemon in the world, right? I mean, you can't get elected president unless you believe that. Although we might see some difference now with Kennedy and who's the other guy running? Trump. Oh, yeah, him. So he's actually, interestingly, taken by far the best position I've ever heard from a presidential candidate on a war. What he said at the CNN town hall, that was stunning to me. To me, that was almost a perfect statement. That's what I would say if I were running for president about Ukraine. Out now is all he said, essentially. Go ahead.
Well, he didn't say that, actually. I mean, maybe it's fruitless to parse the utterances of Donald Trump at this point.
But he said 24 hours. Didn't he say 24 hours?
Well, he says that he would negotiate a solution. He didn't say that we would therefore be out. Like, he just said he would get together a solution by convening Zelensky and Putin within 24 hours. I mean, the point is, I don't know, how much stock do you really put in these sort of blurtings of words at this point that come out of his mouth? I mean, he said the same stuff in the 2016 campaign. We should get along with Russia. I mean, this was what caused the freak out against him, even though it was so mild, what he was saying.
Respond.
I agree with Mike.
Well, didn't a few things happen in between to prevent that?
Oh, with Trump, yeah.
I mean, it's not like he's the dictator.
Russia. But Mike's point that you can't, that whatever Trump says, it's just not going to happen. He says a bunch of things that sound great. Like, he talks about taking on the neocons, but then he appoints a bunch of neocons to his cabinet. And maybe if he somehow got back in this time, things would be different. But I think Mike's point that you can't really take what Trump says too seriously, I think that's borne out by...
Yeah, Aaron agrees with me, Max. I mean, look at the speech that Putin gave on the eve of the initiation of the war. Several of the key grievances that he explicates in that speech as to U.S. foreign policy were done by Donald Trump. Now, that doesn't comport with the domestic American conception of Trump's relationship with Putin, because they think that he's just flattering him and giving him everything he wants. But if you look at the actual policy brass tacks, Putin includes Trump in the whole slew of precedents that, to him, justified the launching of the war.
My vantage point on that has been that Trump probably was essentially psyoped himself with the Russian collusion into doing so, into arming Ukraine. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Psyoped.
And that's what the impeachment was about.
Right.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah,
he had to pretend to be tough.
Yeah, absolutely. He certainly was given a huge incentive to show that he's not a Putin puppet, and I certainly think that was a motive behind Russiagate. The point is, if Trump had real principles, he would have.
Oh, come on.
He would have told everyone to fuck off.
Or just like basic organizational focus.
And not appointed people who tried to constantly undermine the agenda that he ran on.
Agreed.
You know.
Yeah. No, I hope there's no one on this panel that still thinks Donald Trump has any real principles other than power. But I guess once again I am sympathetic just to the position that he was put in, because he's kind of an outsider to politics. He gets in there and he surrounds himself, granted, with a bunch of neocons that he fell in love with because they were regulars on Fox News, and that's what he fills his whole cabinet with. But then he has this he has the entire deep state truly working against him.
And that's where you got to give him a little sympathy, because he probably factored in at a certain point the possibility that he might get killed if he doesn't go along with the neocons. I think that would be a rational thing for him to think about. So that's where I have a little bit of sympathy for him. But at the same time,
I know for a fact through sources close to Trump that he was deathly afraid of assassination.
I mean, okay, he was also the most powerful person on planet Earth. And
but he's
had a lot of avenues to marshal that power.
But that's the point. He's actually not. That's the point. He's not the most powerful person.
Who's the most powerful person?
It's the people around him.
No, who's the most powerful person? If you had to isolate it to one person.
Who's in charge of BlackRock?
I mean, like, technically he has power, but it doesn't really matter if the moment he actually wields it, he will be, undermined and possibly even killed, which I do think is a fair fear on his part, if that indeed was going to.
It also seems like a pretty convenient excuse to just completely abdicate the things that you had pledged to do, because you're saying, oh, there's these subtle forces always conspiring against me, which I don't deny that there were. I mean, look at the double impeachments, and look at now, even today, yesterday, they put out an indictment where he's being charged with, quote, national security crimes against national security. That's what the prosecutor melodramatically announced. So this is a real phenomenon. But at the same time, I mean, you do wield the most power of any single person on the entire planet.
Sam.
I sort of have a critique of this and a solution. Critique is that my line of Trump is that he's the opposable thumb of the establishment. He seems to be against it, but he helps it grab more. But that also kind of applies to Obama. I think that the left got played with Obama and the right got played with Trump. My solution is that there be and to the extent that we should care about electoral politics at all, which is a questionable proposition, but to the extent we should, my solution, which I've advocated for many years now, is Vote Pact, which is disenchanted Democrats, disenchanted Republicans teaming up along what I would call a Kucinich-Ron Paul alliance, and both vote for an independent or third-party candidate. If you do it from either side, you're a spoiler, and people who ostensibly agree with you 90% of the time will spend all of their energies attempting to destroy you, as happened with Nader and Green Party and other candidates. That I perceive as the only really serious, viable way to make genuine progress out of this deadlock of the duopoly that we have. In this campaign, we're in this odd predicament of Cornel West running in the general, even though he's quite clearly coming from the left, and Kennedy, and we can critique Kennedy, but he seems to be coming from some form of radical center, which would make much more sense in a general rather than in a Democratic primary. So we're in this odd bind from my point of view, further impeding the possibility of getting past the duopoly structure.
I want to shift a little bit. I want to talk about, again, doing this kind of work in journalism and what it means for your reputation. How many of us here have ever appeared on RT? Done. We're done.
Not lately.
So as I said, I've been following the war very closely since it started, which means I have been introduced to a lot of sort of realists out there who are like Scott Ritter's out there, the Duran, who I strongly recommend. There's others who are in this space who at first when I saw them, I thought, wow, these are awesome. These guys have a tremendous critique. They're anti-war. I helped you get Scott on your show, right? I think, or no, maybe you didn't get on the show. Or
not Ritter. I met him at the Rage Against War rally.
Okay, yeah, and I love what Scott's done. But have you guys ever suspected that it might be true for some people in this space that they might be a little too close to the Kremlin? I'll say Scott Ritter. I'm afraid. I think so. And again, I love what he's done, and this doesn't discredit, even if it's true what I'm saying. He just did a tour of Russia. I mean, he did a tour sponsored by Sputnik, I think.
Well, in his own words, he declared that he's an ardent, passionate supporter of the Russian war effort.
He's pro-Z.
He's not hiding it.
He's pro-Z.
So,
yeah.
I mean, you say you like these guys because they're anti-war. He's putting out
You're
an
right.
explicit case for
You're right.
one party's war effort.
You're exactly right.
The whole premise of this
You're exactly right.
is weird. But I don't care. I just don't care.
I
don't search people out if they're for being anti-war. There's nothing I would recommend more to any of you than to watch RT at least once a day. Their news broadcasts at the top of the hour. You should download their app or watch it on Rumble. It's not just about Ukraine. It's about understanding the new multipolar world order, and it's delivered to you in English in a very clear way, and you have the agency and critical faculties to be able to understand that you're watching a Russian backed news broadcast, but you have to understand what's going on in the world. And so you have to just understand what other people's perspectives are and where they're coming from, but you have to listen to them, just like I've been willing to listen to other perspectives in my own country. And I'm proud to continue to go on RT and volunteer my opinions and build a bridge, I'm going to try to build a bridge with Russia rather than destroy their country.
But would you agree with everything that Scott says about the war?
No.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that I'm just
Who
going to
agrees with everybody?
throw out the bait.
Well, I think we probably all do kind of agree. I would imagine about this war. I don't think there's any significant disagreement among us.
Okay, but
there's a real difference between being pro-Z.
But
I've had Mark Sloboda again. I think he's fantastic. He was on my show, but he's pro-Z. He wears a Z thing on his lapel.
Yeah, but
RT
Sloboda
sells Z T-shirts.
Yeah.
But Sloboda, I mean, it's like you are consulting someone, first of all, who speaks very clear English in a compelling way, who is close to, he has sources in the Russian security establishment, and you want that as an American. You want to know what's going on there. That's why you listen to Mark Sloboda.
I'm talking about as activists here, not as journalists. As journalists, of course, that's why I had them both on my show, and I loved what they did. I'm saying as political people, as activists, what do we do about those people? I don't...
That's their right to have those views. I mean,
well, of course.
I don't care. I mean, what do I care what someone's personal opinion is about who they favor in the war? I just care about if their facts are correct and if they have something to offer that's interesting.
So,
well, yeah, how about allowing that they have the right, of course, as does everyone under the Constitution, but not misportraying them as something that they're not? I mean, you even started out saying you like these guys because they're anti-war, and then we just established that he's an ardent pro-war advocate. That's fine. That's a legitimate perspective. I also want to hear that perspective to inform my own understanding, but then I also wouldn't cast him as something diametric opposite to what he says he is.
Let me inject a little bit of history again here. So during the Vietnam War, this became a major issue because the left actually kind of split around this particular issue. A big chunk of the hard Marxist left, which then in the 60s was fairly large, not only was opposed to the US war, but was sided with the Viet Cong openly. Major factions of the left sided with the Viet Cong. And much of the left, including my parents who were involved in the anti-war movement, were not into that. And it really alienated a lot of people, and it really damaged the anti-war movement, I think. So it was an issue then, and I think it's becoming an issue now, or at least I think I'd like to make it an issue. But again, I'm not talking about silencing these guys. I've had them on my show, and I didn't criticize them. I've praised them. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just as political people, what is our attitude toward those who take a pro-Z, pro-Russian war position?
Yeah, I have talked to some people who it seems as if they want Russia to flatten Ukraine, and that disturbs me because at my core, I am just anti-war. I'm a real peacenik. I want to see the death stop. So, whether you think I tend to agree with them when their assessment is this has been, antagonized and provoked for decades, and ultimately Russia has a greater right for this invasion than the U.S. does for all of the conquests that they've participated in over the past 20, 30 years. It's like, yeah, I agree with that, but it doesn't change the fact that innocent women and children are dying. That's terrible. And young men, conscripted too. So I'm torn on it. I ultimately, of course, I agree, like they can have that perspective, but I don't agree with them that this war is good.
During the Iraq War, a little more history, I think it was the Entire Answer Coalition, which was the leading group in the anti-war movement then, or at least it was a faction in Answer, was explicitly pro-Saddam. And that was a major problem.
I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. That wouldn't match.
There was a split inside the anti-war coalition, but I believe the split was about there were some people who were
over Palestine.
No, but also there were people who were anti-war and also anti-sanctions. And other people who were anti-war, but they were pro-sanctions.
Phyllis Bennis was pro-sanctions.
There we go. So
I don't know about that.
And so people who were anti-sanctions might have been called pro-Saddam. So look, I mean.
No, there were actual people who were promoting Saddam's program. I'm not saying they were a majority, but they were in there.
Or at least wouldn't condemn.
No, it was more than that. No, it was a positive portrayal of Saddam.
This is all muddied. Like, first of all, Viet Cong. It's one thing from a strategic point of view to jump on a SAM battery and celebrate them as you go there as a celebrity. It's kind of a dumb move. The Viet Cong was a legitimate national liberation movement of a peasant people who had been colonized and were being destroyed in a genocidal assault. And we have to, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging the legitimacy of their struggle from an objective point of view, but to conflate them with the leader of a powerful country like Russia, I think, is ahistorical. We can also look at Russia's position with respect to the United States and NATO and turn to what John Mearsheimer just said in Washington, D.C., which is that Putin was essentially left without any options, and military action was rendered inevitable by the systematic demolition and rejection of the Minsk Accords and the NATOization of Ukraine. And as we all know, Kissinger said it himself, without Ukraine, Russia is nothing. Or in the words of the NED founder, Karl Gershman, Russia is the prize from Ukraine. Russia is the prize. We all know that this war is about destroying Russia. I believe that what the Russians are fighting for is their national existence. But does it mean that I support the war? No, I'm an American. It's completely irrelevant whether I support it or not. And it's honestly, if you're wearing a Z button and you're an American, it's like a marketing scheme or something.
Wearing a Che shirt.
Same is a similar thing. It's like I'm based, okay? It's not my role. I know that this war will not be resolved through negotiations because I learned the lessons of Syria, and I knew that the U.S. was not serious about the Astana Accords over Syria because they did not want to allow mid-level powerful countries like Turkey or Russia to have a role in the resolution. And so they continued to support a dirty war to destroy a country, and it was up to Russia to end that through military means. And that's how this will be resolved. Unfortunately, that is lamentable. It is horrible. It means, as you said, Clint, tens and tens of thousands of more Ukrainian and Russian young men will die. And so our job here is not to care about our reputations. Our work speaks for itself. It is to get in the way of the psychopathic Newlandite elites who are preventing any path but a military resolution. That's our job as Americans, and it's the only area where we can have any influence. I can denounce Putin all day. What does he care?
I do think this this idea that everybody has to go around denouncing every evildoer in the world or else you're complicit in their evildoing is ridiculous. But I also think that if you're going to make a proactive argument that Putin had, quote, no options left, you are choosing to at least present some sort of justificatory framework for the legitimacy of that action. You're not required to do that. I mean, and it's also arguable that he had, quote, no other options. I don't think there's been ever a world leader who's launched a war who didn't also claim that they had no option but to do so. So is this just the first time that now that's a correct assertion in world history? Because all the rest of them have not really been borne out.
It's actually John Mearsheimer's argument. I mean, who's a fairly establishment member of our side, who said specifically at the very beginning of the operation, he said Putin had no other options.
Yeah, I think.
You're saying no world leader has ever said they had no option but to launch a military campaign?
No world leader has said anything but that they had no option to launch the war. When they launched the war, they say, I had no option. That's always the rationale.
I mean, both Bushes said, we've gone the last mile for peace. It was complete and utter transparent bullshit, but they make that claim.
You're conflating Bush with Hafez al-Assad and Anwar Sadat on the eve of the 73 war, when parts of their countries were occupied by Israel and they launched a war against Israel. This is, again, it's ahistorical, and it doesn't understand the position that Russia is in. Russia is a target of empire. It is surrounded by empire. It historically has been under siege for hundreds of years.
I guess if you think that war itself is like an inherently crazy enterprise and crazy making and produces all kinds of second and third order ill effects, meaning warfare itself, the actual kinetic action, and it causes all kinds of crazed radicalism and all kinds of grievances and antagonisms, and then you see that somebody has launched a war, then that's something that they did which produced all those ill effects. And if your first instinct is to leap to give a justification for it, I don't know that that's really anti-war. It's something else. I mean, it's not necessarily an illegitimate position.
This is why it's very important to answer this question.
You're speaking in moral terms and obfuscating history, in using the same vague definition of anti-war that the Trotskyists of the left, who favor permanent revolution and regime change of anyone who's deemed fascist or a dictator, uses. It flows right into neoconservatism.
Well, I mean, my definition
And
is
fundamentally,
my
I'm
definition of anti-war is opposing the initiation of warfare.
Well, politics is warfare by other means, and when politics fails, war enters the picture. From an objective, cold, hard, realistic standpoint, that's what happened here, because the United States, the empire, the most powerful empire in the history of man, rendered such an outcome impossible. And you have to at least present another scenario in which this conflict could have been presented when the Minsk Accords had reached their limit. What was left? And what was left for the population of the Donbass? What was left for the population of Crimea? What was left for the population on the other side of the border in Belgorod who are now under assault?
After the war was launched. Like, the war was launched, and have the people of Belgorod fared
The war
better?
was already underway. It's been underway since 2014.
Have there been ground incursions into Belgorod before February 2022?
No, that's what stood on the horizon.
Let me try to
Do
clear.
you understand also that Ukraine may have actually attacked the Donbass in an offensive? Look at what was happening on the contact line. Look at the assessments that were being made. There were hundreds and hundreds of ceasefire violations by the Ukrainians daily. I mean, we at the Gray Zone interviewed someone who lived there in Donetsk, Russell Bentley, who, fervently pro-war, nationalist, whatever, irrelevant. The point is, he was telling me 48 hours before this assault that everybody said wasn't going to happen, this invasion that everyone said that wasn't going to happen, that Grad missiles were raining down on his neighborhood in the Donetsk, and they weren't going to put up with it, and Russia was going to come in in his words, smash the Ukrainians. And that wasn't something that I celebrated or wanted from a moral point of view. I considered it horrible, but I'm just talking about the reality.
That's the point.
That's the point.
That is not
That's
the
where we
point.
agree then.
No, because I'm not just an activist who thinks of everything in moral terms. I have to live in reality.
No. But you have
Wait. Yeah,
Sorry. Each of us has a position on this war, right? We each have a particular position. We know what we want, right? And that determines what our journalism is. We know this, right? That's what determines the work we do, how we do it. So Max, and I was going to ask all of you this, what is your position on the war? What do you want to see done?
Well, it's probably the same as all of you. I want some negotiated solution immediately.
Okay,
and
so that's very.
It's not going to happen, though.
So that's contrary to people like Scott Ritter, who want, as Michael said, basically the annihilation of Ukraine as a nation state.
Well, from the Russian.
No. Listen, I think it's totally fair to criticize Scott for whatever you want, but he's never advocated the annihilation of Ukraine as a state. He does consider it to be a Nazi regime. He does think that Nazis have a huge influence in Ukraine that can only be resolved through military force, but he does not want the annihilation of the state. And what he wants is basically, as I understand his position, and I don't follow every word he says, is just basically he wants a resolution to the issue that the U.S. and the Ukraine's far right refused to address, which is the fate of ethnic Russians inside Ukraine who were under assault for the last 8 years. That's just true, militarily and culturally. And he also wants the Azov militias and their ilk disbanded. And he wants the issues addressed of like the fact that Russia does have U.S. missile systems on its borders in Poland and Romania. He wants that resolved as well. He does not want the annihilation of Ukraine as a state.
I think you're wrong, but it doesn't matter. I mean, we know, hang on. I mean, it doesn't matter. We do know that there is a faction, a significant faction within Russia, and also some in the West, of pro-Z people who do want the annihilation of the nation state of Ukraine. So,
what do you mean the annihilation of that?
He
they want Russia.
He called for the
propaganda
conquest of
They
Ukraine.
want Russia to take over the whole thing.
Ritter called for the conquest of Ukraine, Aaron. I mean, I don't. If that doesn't mean the annihilation of the state, it's just semantics.
They want conquest. Yes, that's what
I mean,
I
so
don't even recall him saying I want
the quote.
But I don't.
It doesn't matter though.
I feel strange having a conversation about someone who isn't here and can't answer for
I'm not talking
themselves.
about Ritter. I'm talking about that
Many
faction,
people consider
that
the
thinking.
neutrality of Ukraine the annihilation of Ukraine.
Right,
Anything anything other than a Maidan regime, which
Yes.
is nationalist in character, which is a porcupine in the neighborhood, a sort of big Israel in Eastern Europe that is directed against Russia and anti-Russia. Anything less than that for many people is considered the destruction of Ukraine. And the fact is,
that's a neocon talking
this
point.
This is just a
yeah.
fact. This is not what I want or whatever. I wish Zelensky would go back to being like the guy who wore leather pants and high heels and was funny and danced and like didn't take himself seriously and like played the piano with his dick and all that. And he would negotiate, but he's not that anymore. He's not. That's not what he is. He's like cranked up on Adderall, and he's ready to wage war indefinitely. And as long as Ukraine is controlled by the Maidan regime, which is clearly a proxy for NATO on Russia's doorstep, there will not be peace. That's just a fact. And I think for many years we're going to be living
the
in
negotiated
conflict.
settlement you want, and this is where it comes down to, right?
It's going to have to be imposed on Ukraine through military force, and that is not what I want. I'm just telling you all what's going to happen, just like in Syria, and I didn't want that either. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people are dead.
If U.S. support were to be withdrawn, do you still think that it would require it to be forced? Because I think that they wouldn't be able to fight.
Exactly. I mean, if you guys won up in New Hampshire, if like the Pork Fest took over, there would be peace in Ukraine,
correct.
But that ain't going to happen.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Again, it's about what we want as political activists, and again, that determines what our journalism is about it.
I'll just give my quick answer. I would like to see basically the east of the Dnieper, I think that's how you pronounce it, the river. Most of that is like where the more predominantly Russian-speaking
and
folks
Crimea,
are.
I take it?
Yes, and
Both?
Crimea. Yep. I think that they ought to be given, like many of them have already had referendums that have wanted to be autonomous nations. I think that that would be the most reasonable and peaceful outcome to this. I tend to agree with Max. I don't think that will be what happens. I think that for whatever reason, and we probably will get into this later, the Western world order has decided that they have put their flag in the ground in Ukraine, and this war will be won, or at least it will be a bloodbath for decades to bleed Russia, as they've said many times. Unfortunately, I think that's the future that we're looking at, and it's tragic. I mean, this is why I support RFK so vocally, is because I think he has the capacity to bring the left and their better instincts, the anti-war folks, back to the fore. So I wish him success.
And if Russia announces that it intends to conquer Kiev and Lvov, what would your position be on that?
My position is that I never support intervention. I just don't. I think that even if you believe that would be a good cause, the U.S. specifically has lost its moral authority to intervene anywhere in the world. We need to stop.
I'm going to surprise you. So I'm actually fairly sympathetic to Z. Maybe not as much as Scott Ritter is and others and Mark Sloboda, but I actually do understand as a person, if I were living in the Donbass and I were Russian ethnic, I can't imagine not calling for the troops to come in. So but I think it's absolutely essential that we clarify our position here. Otherwise, we are sitting ducks for what they say about us. Otherwise, it becomes true that we are Putin's stooges. Just like the left with the Viet Cong and portions of the left with Saddam and the rest. I mean, this is essential. I need to know from you guys, as fans of yours, where you actually stand on this, and I don't know.
Well, I agree with what Max just laid out there in terms of the trajectory that this seems to be inevitably headed on. I mean, I have a big piece that I've been working on now for months. It's going to be coming out soon as to the U.S. policy genesis of a lot of the push towards some kind of ultimate existential clash that is not resolvable anymore through negotiations. I mean, as we speak, they're setting up these international tribunals. The U.S. changed its whole legislative structure to allow for engagement with the International Criminal Court and these kind of ancillary tribunals to set up Nuremberg-modeled tribunals to prosecute Putin personally. That's where the warrant came from in March. That didn't just fall from the sky. That was after the U.S. passed modifications to its own statutory framework to enable specifically the State Department and others, the Justice Department, to engage with the ICC on a robust level to prosecute Putin in particular. So I agree with you that this is where it's all kind of ineluctably headed toward, which is tragic. Yeah. But if you do bring in the moral dimension and ask for my own personal view, my personal view is going to be mostly limited to this. I favor the cessation or mitigation of warfare rather than the perpetuation of it. And so if I hear arguments that give some sort of justificatory basis to the perpetuation of warfare, that just doesn't align with my own perspective.
Okay, so does that mean a negotiated settlement giving Russia Donbass and Crimea? And nothing else?
I only really have a principle, which is to cease the warfare rather than perpetuate it. So I don't have a
Do you want
specific
NATO to be
preference as to what
defeated?
that-
Do you want NATO to be defeated
militarily?
in any way possible?
Anyway,
What do you mean defeated?
Wait,
Like
like nuclear?
Smashed into 1,000 pieces.
No.
Like
I don't
the
know.
the NATO organization.
Not by any
NATO.
means necessary.
What,
You
what
don't
by
mean that,
bombing
do you?
Brussels? I mean, how does that?
Yeah, you don't mean that.
Like, how do you smash NATO into a million pieces?
There are many ways, but
Like what?
it could be a
Like the NATO headquarters is in Brussels. Like, how are you going to smash that?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to fight the war in Brussels. But I mean, isn't that what this is about? I mean, how is NATO going to be disbanded through like a Code Pink interruption? I'm not saying I favor that. I'm just putting you on the spot. Like
gonna be disbanded,
when you speak in purely moral, abstract terms, and then you say you're for a particular outcome that can't be achieved through them, how are you going to get there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was asked a direct question as to what is my own moral view. I don't tend to emphasize that much because there's so much journalistic obfuscation as to like the facts empirically of what's going on. That tends to be my focus.
If you were
But I'm asked,
if you were president, what would you push for as a negotiated settlement?
I would do what the Biden administration has done the antithesis of thus far, which is have my guiding principle be the cessation of warfare. I mean, everything they've done is to perpetuate the warfare. Blinken just said proudly a week ago that anybody who supports negotiations at this point is just a sap. And that's what they're trying to exacerbate and intensify. So, I mean, in terms of the actual demarcations on the map as to like what land partition goes to where, I don't know that I have like a firm personal view as to that. But I think you have to change your moral calculus overall if you want to have a different avenue being taken as to how to address the conflict.
If I were president, it would be rather easy. I would disband NATO, ensure a contiguous, a whole Ukraine that obviously wouldn't be part of NATO, wouldn't be part of any threat to Russia.
Oh, so what about Donbass and Crimea? What about what about them? What are you doing with them?
Have an actual Ukraine that would defend the rights of all of the citizens of it. That might seem Pollyannish now, but I think if NATO's not there, then that's an end of war.
You mean remove Russia from the east and south?
I think Russia would be amenable.
Not to Crimea. They're going to lose their water port at Sevastopol.
Crimea might. If you're Putin, and the offer on the table is we'll disband NATO if you give back Crimea, wouldn't you take it?
Oh, okay.
I am Putin. And I'm going to take off my shirt and ride a horse right now through this auditorium.
You never know when Max is going to go into comedy mode.
Do you have all kind of terminal diseases that people in the U.S. have made up?
I would not take it.
Really?
No, because I wouldn't trust the
disband
them for
NATO.
Shit. But they're not going to do it. They'll create some other alliance, and then they're asking me to give up. And I mean, this is getting
a little far afield.
I mean, I don't support NATO, but
sorry, you put out put out that hypothetical, and I answered.
No, it's a great answer. Aaron, what's your position? What do you want?
I think there should be negotiations. I'm not a diplomat, so I don't see a point in me putting a solution on the table. But I mean, to me, the solutions on the table was there before.
Exactly.
There was the Minsk Accords, which I think were a good compromise. Keep Ukraine's borders intact with the exception of Crimea and allow for some autonomy for ethnic Russians. No longer have their language be banned and have them under assault. That makes sense to me. But Ukraine gets to keep its territory. And, have the U.S. respect its pledge to not expand NATO, which they've violated for 3 decades. And Russia's proposals that it put on the table in December 2021, I thought there's a lot there that was at least worth discussing, but the U.S. refused to even discuss those issues. So how about start there, just a willingness to discuss the issues that Russia put on the table in December 2021, which to me were not just, I think, understandable from Russia's point of view, but I think good for the world. Like Russia's proposal called back for the rollback of offensive weaponry by everybody, not just by NATO, but even by Russia as well. It was talked about like reciprocal commitments there. So why not start there? But unfortunately, I think that moment has passed. And we might just be looking at, as was discussed, a frozen conflict forever with an armistice, endless, perpetual conflict with the U.S. just constantly using Ukraine as a bulwark. And that's maybe where we're headed. But I think we can start just with negotiations and see what happens.
How about this as a position? As Americans, maybe all we should call for, and this is essentially maybe my position, all we should call for is the United States exiting entirely from the conflict, just having nothing to do with it, and that's really all the position we need? Is that good enough for us?
I think that's reasonable, and we want to see an end to this conflict, but I'm also wary of negotiations, because what's going to happen in negotiations between a Biden or a Trump and a Putin? They're going to cut a deal.
Oh, yeah.
That's probably going to come at the expense of somebody else.
But we don't even want that. We don't want any deal making. We want them to stop dealing with this issue immediately, right?
It's a recipe for some kind of spheres of influence, for better or worse, although they could well be out to completely lynch Putin like they completely lynched Saddam or Gaddafi. That could well be their ultimate goal. But if that isn't their goal, or if that isn't attainable, then it could be an unjust peace, which we should be wary of.
All right. Clint, last word before we go to Q&A.
Well, I would just say I'm not so concerned with an unjust peace as I am with nuclear holocaust. So I just really want there to be any buffer zone possible between NATO and Russia. I think that there's this horrifying position that Western diplomats, if you want to call them that, warmongering psychopaths is more accurate description, where they continue to press the flame closer to Putin, and then they go, see, he said he was going to respond, but he didn't, so let's press it closer. I mean, it's fucking insane. Mm-hmm. And that's honestly their perspective, is that, like, well, he said if we did this, that he would do that, and he didn't do that, so let's go further. It's crazy. I mean, we're in an escalatory trap, and I just feel like, from my perspective, as much as I weep for the predicament of the people in Ukraine, ultimately, my greater concern is for all of humanity and of World War III. So whatever gets us closer to avoiding that.
Right on. So,
and I just want to say one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to pick up on what Max said before about Vietnam, because to me this is important. If my country is waging a genocidal war against somebody else, and we caused it, yeah, I'm going to be pro the people who are fighting back. I am. And I see no problem with that.
Well, to what extent, though? I mean, there's
to whatever extent that they need to defend themselves from being genocided, because, and I'm not going to, like try to pick apart problems with their national liberation effort, because they're the ones who are being wiped out by my government that I'm supporting. So I have no problem at all with people who want to support people who are resisting.
Can I? Can I build on that? Can I build on that for just a second? Because
wait, just pause real quick. If you would like to ask a question, come to the mic right here.
Yeah, let's
and
get
stand
the
up there.
questions
I'd love to get you guys involved in this. So come on up and just make a line in front of that mic. Go ahead, Sam.
I really think that a lot of people who criticize authoritarian third world movements are actually criticizing the people in the U.S. incapacity to rein in the U.S. empire. That is, to the extent that third world movements or countries are authoritarian, it's largely because if you're not, you're going to end up like Allende or Zelaya or Mossadegh or anybody else. So because people in the U.S. have failed to stop targeting of open, reformist third world efforts, you need to be a Saddam if you're going to be sitting on top of oil and trying to have an independent path. You need to be authoritarian, or else you're going to end up offed.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
Very good point.
Interesting point. Yeah. Okay. We have a lot of people here. Let's go. Let's hear. I'm dying to know what you guys think. Go ahead.
I need a sec. I just forgot what I was going to say.
Do you want to just step back? No problem. I have the same problem.
Okay. I'm a New York City teacher. I don't know if you're asking people to identify themselves at all here.
That'd be nice.
Sure. Pronouns.
I'm going to try to make this into a question.
Mental disability.
Can you and all your different attempts to reach audiences stop using the word neocon in a way that assumes the audience knows what you're talking about? So take the time to not just use that as like an informative word that carries all this meaning. to
It's
people,
even worse than that. It's often used to describe all sorts of different people.
At the same time, do a better job of explaining how Ukraine is a neocon project.
Yep.
Or the U.S. approach to Russia has been a neocon project for the last 3 decades. And so don't use it, but then use it better, I guess is what I'm saying.
Super important and interesting point. I've gotten into arguments with a few people about this.
I think this argument could go on for an hour knowing this.
I don't want to, I'm not going to do that, but I mean, I do think it's important. I mean, I've gotten into several arguments with people who use neocon to describe basically everyone in the foreign policy establishment these days. So
that's accurate.
Now the thing is, these days, recently, there is a tremendous convergence, I would say, among sort of what I would call like the Democratic Party foreign policy establishment and the Republican Party foreign policy establishment around these issues, certainly NATO and Ukraine. But there are, or are there, any significant differences between, say, Tony Blinken and Victoria Nuland and the Kagan family, right? Are there any significant differences that we need to care about between Jake Sullivan over here and the Kagans? I don't know. It's a good question. Is there such a thing as neoliberalism in this context?
But here's the
meaningfully different.
Here's the problem with just calling everything neocon. Well, I mean, just very quickly.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is not a neoconservative. Doesn't mean he's good. He has a particular worldview from which he's approached the issue of Ukraine for decades. And if you just lump everything into this banner of neocon, then you fail to understand the actual genesis of the project that he's pursued that's led to this point.
That's my
So it's not just about being nitpicky as to terminology.
I agree.
I think when we say neocons, Michael, all we mean is Jews.
Well, then I'm on board with that, Max.
Is that good enough?
No, Dick Cheney was not a neocon either, and if you want to get technical, he adopted their agenda because it was useful to him, and they had a shared agenda. Right. I just think we need a word that's easy for people to understand to explain the hyper-militaristic, hegemonic-minded foreign policy bureaucracy that spans the Beltway uniparty and is sponsored by arms industry, and you see them nested in the Democratic administration now, but they could just as easily be part of a DeSantis administration. We just need a word people can understand, but it's just not, neocon's like a cool word. It has like an impact, so I just use it, and I'm just going to stay with that.
It does sort of distract from the broader scope of things of it being neo-colonialist, in a sense.
Yeah, but then people get, like, you
right,
can't
people
bring as
get
many
nervous
people
about
along
that.
with that. That's like
So
academic.
we need to propose a word to replace neocon, everyone. We'll have a vote at the end of the festival.
Neocon speaks to the continuity, though, since the 1990s, that these people have kind of been close to power ever since then. But that's not my question.
Yeah.
It's a statement, actually.
Yeah.
My question is...
I just wanted to answer for the other guy. I did an episode on my show called The War They Wanted, which is an hour kind of rundown of a bunch of the audio of John McCain and Lindsey Graham and all these lunatics that were fomenting the war in Ukraine. So I think that you were asking for kind of a better explanation as to how we got into this and who's to blame. I would recommend that one to you.
Nice.
Sorry, go ahead.
So everyone agrees that about 14,000 died in Donbass before Russia invaded. Mm-hmm. If not Russia, whose responsibility was it, as Minsk was failing, to defend or protect these people? The UN certainly wasn't going to involve themselves.
Mm-hmm. People aren't familiar with the plight of the people of Donetsk and Lugansk in America. That story's never been told. I mean, the amount of death and crippling injuries they've suffered and the struggle that they've waged for their own independence. We always hear, oh, you oppose Ukraine's sovereignty? They were fighting for sovereignty too. No one was protecting them except for Russia. No one. The world abandoned them in the same way that the world has abandoned the Palestinians, except all states have abandoned the Palestinians except for Iran. And had the factions in the Gaza Strip not had the capacity to hit back against Israel, they would have been basically placed into the desert of Sinai as effectively part of Egypt. They would not exist as a Palestinian nation with an actual struggle. That's just those are the cold, hard realities, and that I think rendered this conflict inevitable once Minsk was effectively abused and exploited to put new facts on the ground in the same way that the Oslo Accords were exploited and abused by the U.S. under the watch of the U.S. to allow Israel to put new facts on the ground and render conflict inevitable, first with the Second Intifada, which was a response to record colonization of the West Bank in the late 1990s, and then with the conflicts we've seen around the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip was walled off under the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords was the basis for walling off Gaza and putting the apartheid wall in and around the West Bank, as the Minsk Accords were the basis for the hyper-militarization and NATOization of Ukraine.
Isn't it remarkable that in the mainstream media there is no mention of anything before February 24th, 2022? Not a word about the history of this thing. And the war, of course, started in 2014. You could even say it started in 1945 when the United States started recruiting Ukrainian nationalist Nazis and working with them in the CIA to pump propaganda, Ukrainian nationalist, anti-Russian, racist anti-Russian propaganda into Ukraine for 40 years. It's an incredible story that's only just starting to be told now, that the CIA, working with these Ukrainian nationalists throughout the Cold War, pumping propaganda day and night into Ukraine that was nationalist and anti-Russian racist, is clearly a major part of the ideological basis for the Ukrainian government and military and for the war itself. So here we go.
So just a quick comment and a very quick question as well. I do think that what Aaron especially was saying regarding the support for the Vietnamese National Liberation Front draws a distinction that I think we should all be making, especially people on the left. There's a difference between being anti-war and anti-imperialist. Many of us, myself included, would say nearly every U.S. war in this long history of wars, maybe 1% of which are covered in U.S. schools, the party that was fighting the United States had every moral right and justification, I know this is uncomfortable, but to kill U.S. soldiers. That was more than justified, and from Mexicans in the Mexican-American War to Nicaraguans when U.S. occupied it, to Iraqis, to Afghans, to Vietnamese. I don't think we need to qualify ourselves as anti-war and those people not having the right to defend themselves. They had the right and justification, and they deserve our moral support, but that's not my question.
Agreed.
But my question is, I myself, like my friend here, I am a public educator here in New Jersey. I teach history. And the last few years especially, as I've gotten more into this content, I've struggled with how to frame these kinds of conflicts. And, you know, as I just said, the United States has been at war for nearly every year of its history, and yet students in history classes learn about 3 of them, and they don't know those very well either. So my feeling was, and you can affirm this or confront it, they are so deluged, we as Americans are so bombarded with pro-war propaganda, pro-imperialist. You can't go to a baseball game without the fighter jets flying over. Our movies are edited by the Pentagon and the CIA, thousands of them. It's everywhere. So my feeling is that as a public educator, this fetishization of you need to present both sides of the argument, my sense is that, no, we don't. They already have the other side. We need to present an extremely critical view of U.S. history, especially regarding war. But my question for you, myself as an educator, but you are all educators in your own right, like you presumably have people in your lives that are aren't as vested in this material as you quote-unquote normies. How do you approach the Ukraine war, in our current sense? Most Americans are firmly pro-Ukrainian, even if they don't necessarily support U.S. involvement. How do you broach these extremely complex topics with quote-unquote normie people, while still, of course, maintaining your beliefs and maintaining your friendships with these people? But what is an easy way, maybe not easy, what is a suggested way to start talking to people and educating people about this conflict?
Great question.
I mean, I have a suggestion. Ditch the whole anti-imperialist framework. I'm sorry, but a lot of people hear that term and roll their eyes because it just has a connotation of radicalism. How about just describe it accurately? I'm going to give you the facts of the situation, and the facts lead to maybe what you might consider an anti-imperial conclusion. But I think if you use that kind of nomenclature, it automatically is going to make people kind of question it.
Is it not a fact that the United States has been an imperialist power for 200 years?
I mean, sure, I guess. I just think it's not useful terminology if you want to communicate to normies, which was the question. And also, I mean, this idea, I have to address something that was said before quickly. This idea that one should just resign oneself to the inevitability of war, I think is really perilous. Because war is never, quote, inevitable. War is made inevitable by a confluence of actors who decide to pursue war as a solution to whatever grievances they're claiming are ailing them. And so I think just, I mean, people have said the same thing about World War II, World War I. Every war is somehow just inevitable and metaphysical and like an act of physics rather than an act of human agency.
Well, I never said that. If I resigned myself to the inevitability of war, no, on a personal level, if I resigned myself to the inevitability of war, I would leave Washington D.C. and go sell shit on Etsy from Nicaragua. Like my life would be, I'd have a much higher.
Join you actually.
I'd have a much higher quality of life.
You actually do that. True. I mean, I'll join you. That sounds fun.
I'm just talking about operating within a realistic point of view and using our influence where we have it, which is in Washington D.C. That's why I choose to live there. Clint.
Oh, I just wanted to say, he was talking about, well, let's just deliver the facts. And I go the complete opposite direction with normies because I feel like they're sleepwalking. So I just go like, do you want to die in nuclear hellfire?
Does that wake them up?
That's good.
It tends to get people to at least like, now they want to hear why I'm so concerned, because I am genuinely concerned about World War III. Like genuinely, deeply, like have lost a few hours of sleep here and there over it. I feel as if we are not we on this panel or in this room, but broadly speaking, we are sleepwalking our way into a conflict that could literally end all life on Earth. And it's not discussed in that way. It's portrayed as being fear-mongering if you ever even mention it. But I think that it's important that people understand this is not just about virtue signaling support for the downtrodden Ukrainians. This is about the potential for a cataclysm that we have never seen before. So I don't know if you could tell that to your students per se, but otherwise, yeah, I do that.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
The problem I face when I speak to just normies, to call them that, is I need at least like 5 minutes to give my whole spiel. So this,
Right.
It's so because we're so propagandized, you can just repeat. Russia launched this unprovoked invasion. You can say that in 5 seconds, but I need talk about the Minsk Accords, NATO expansion, and Poland and Romania. There's missile sites there, and then you have the betrayal of Russia in Libya because they went along with the UN Security Council resolution, and Syria and all this stuff, and the Maidan coup of 2014. So it's just the first question I always ask is, are you open to hearing a alternative point of view? And if they're not, then forget it.
It's such a complex issue to explain. I mean, I've spent more than a year studying this thing, and I'm still catching up with the details of it. When the United States started outsourcing its wars by using proxies, right, fighting wars through other countries, it made it that much more difficult to explain why Americans should care about it, because our boys are not over there fighting and dying. It's so much more difficult. It just adds a whole other layer of complexity to explain to people, again, who don't even know where fucking Ukraine is, much less the Minsk Accords, I mean, so, yes. Oh, sorry, Max.
Go ahead. Women's voice. Yeah. We haven't heard one yet, but then I want to take a stab at it.
I'm from the UK, and I was part of the left. I was a journalist. And I don't know if you noticed that your media landscape is a little bit better than ours. You've at least got Tucker Carlson, who will mention some of the things like Cy Hirsch. We don't have anything. The BBC won't report on anything. With RT is banned. The Socialist Workers' Party supports the endless arming of Ukraine.
Oh my God.
Wow. Jeremy Corbyn, who I think was the best anti-war candidate ever, was sabotaged. People got kicked out of the Labour Party for criticizing anything about NATO or
the SWP is for Ukraine?
Yeah, I've got some friends in the party, and they are so pro the party.
Big time.
line.
They're Trotskyists.
They're Trotskyists.
I went to one of their marches. They do support it.
Really?
We have we have no equivalent of you guys. We've got nothing that's anything similar. I know you've got a grey zone in the UK, but other than that, we don't have. Do you think? And you've got the no to anti-war rallies. We don't have anything, and we have Julian Assange in a cage.
Right.
Do you think there's any hope for Europe or our country, or do you think it's or why do you think it's so different? I guess why do you think you have it a little bit better than us?
Well, I actually spent a fair amount of time in the UK, and it is true that the media landscape there is more insular and more unforgiving of any kind of deviation from consensus than in the US, even if it's just by dint of geographic sort of size, in that the U.S. just has a more diffuse landscape and more kind of entry points. And yeah, it's just, you're right. All I can say is I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree.
It seems to me that the UK has been tapped as the US's junior partner to handle a lot of the propaganda stuff. Because, for example, just in our own little world of the gray zone, like if you look at who trolls us, there's so many British people, and there's British officials who like troll me on Twitter.
Oscar J. He's one.
Yeah, exactly. All these people. So it's like there's an infrastructure there. It seems like in terms of like the global propaganda apparatus to like inculcate people with like worshiping NATO. A lot of it does seem like it's run out of the UK, and we've reported on a lot of it. All these leaked documents of all these different spook groups, like the Integrity Initiative, and all these things. Bellingcat. Yeah. All that comes. So it seems like the hub of all this, the UK was chosen for it, and so maybe that has an impact on your media landscape. It's
a particularly crazed society that you come from, especially vis-a-vis Russia. There's a kind of a satirical film called Charge of the Light Brigade about the folly of the British charge into the teeth of the Russian cavalry during the Crimean War. And the film is all about British hysteria, Cold War, high dudgeon hysteria about the Soviet Union. That's what it's about. But it goes back to British Empire and just Britain's imperial legacy so influences its media culture and how they view Russia and why they just hate Russians on such a visceral level. It's so different from and they're in many ways they're pushing the U.S. to the limit. That's something our leaks have shown. They're helping drive the U.S. deeper into this war. I mean, we think of Tony Blair's our poodle. It's not necessarily the case. And by the SWP, I mean, look at the record of police spies that have infiltrated that organization. Or the rally that Michael covered was led by Paul Mason, who we exposed as a security state collaborator. I mean, the left in the UK is...
Hey, and then didn't he submitted my name to some apparatchik he knew in this security state apparatus?
Yes, he informed on Michael to his handler, his literal intelligence handler named Andy Price.
Max, I never told you this. I might have forgotten. But on the flight home after that trip, like when I got back to Newark Airport, I got questioned, interrogated, if you want to put it that way, in a little room with like one light hanging above, by the Border Patrol. And they said that they had suspected that I might have been trafficking arms into Ukraine.
What? Well, were you?
Yes, I was. That was the plot twist.
Let's look at the pattern here. Wow. Michael interrogated on his way back from embarrassing Paul Mason. Kit Clarenberg, who exposed Paul Mason as a security state collaborator and exposed his handler and him, looking at you, interrogated by British counterterror police. Our live stream about Paul Mason being a security state collaborator immediately removed by YouTube on the grounds of targeted harassment, and we're warned with a strike. Something's going on and he has really put himself forward as the voice of Corbynism in the British left as he destroyed Corbyn. And I want to go back to the other question, if there's
and look at the Guardian. What happened to the Guardian, which used to have some decent voices, but all those people who were remotely honest were kicked out. Now they have people like Luke Harding.
Wait, what was the transition point there?
At the Guardian?
Yeah.
You mean Kath Viner?
No, it was the raid.
Oh, the raid.
Their hard drives were stolen.
Yeah.
And that was
right.
And then the MI5, MI6 put their people in there.
Well, Seamus Milne used to be a columnist at The Guardian.
There we go.
Foreign correspondent. Yeah. Had some of the most incisive reporting on the pre-Iraq invasion period. Yep. Then became an advisor to Corbyn, and then got destroyed along with Corbyn as one of these kind of stooges. I do have one suggestion, though. Peter Hitchens is a prominent media figure in the UK, even though he kind of makes it seem like he's this perpetually victimized outcast. Mm-hmm. No, he's on the BBC quite a lot. He has big front page columns on the Mail on Sunday, and he has a roughly similar view on this as does. I would refer to it in ways. I would refer to the conflict overall in ways that appeal to Peter Hitchens' demographic, because that has a potential to be expanded. So refer to it. I don't even use the word proxy war anymore because I think it's kind of gone beyond that. I refer to it as a joint U.S.-Ukraine military operation.
Okay.
With the UK as a subordinate player.
I like that.
And if you can appeal to like their lost glory as this former empire, where they're now like 100% officially subordinated to the U.S., then I think you can kind of like prick and pry on like some, a legacy of pride that they have as to their imperial grandeur.
Right. At least you got Roger Waters, though.
Yeah,
There you
that's
go.
true.
So you got two.
There's individuals who are great, but when we had two right-wing media channels that opened recently, Talk TV and GB News, that were supposed to be like our Fox News, but they're just incredibly pro.
They'll
they're
be
just
controlled
neocons.
up for sure.
Yeah, it's Piers Morgan.
Just in terms of diagnosing, the way I view it is that because the banking institutions, like the old money families exist in your neck of the woods, and you had the old imperial guard that kind of was the global hegemon. Now, because the West, like I look at you guys as our future, kind of like, disarmed, speech rights diminished, and I think that it's as they have said famously, all wars are bankers' wars. I think that that's the reason ultimately that civil rights and things begin to diminish under empire, is that the banking institutions that end up benefiting from the imperialism, they don't want the people to be able to speak out and fight back and stop it. So I think I don't have a lot of advice for you other than to, immigrate maybe.
I think there is a hope in Europe. Your energy is going to eventually get cut off, and Germany has no plan B.
And this is a hopeful note.
We have like a union.
That's the hope.
You're in a recession.
Yeah.
Be happy about
As
that.
Victoria Nuland said, "Fuck the EU."
Right.
We have a trade union movement. We have a trade union movement, and one of the leaders, Eddie Dempsey, actually fought in the Donbass. Yeah,
he's a racist.
Yeah, they call him. They always take photos of him with like, and they use that as a similar smear. They use.
I want to say something that's going to make me very unpopular in this room, but there's a fact that has troubled me as someone with my positions on this, and I think that we need to deal with. And maybe it's nothing, but if you look at geographic proximity to Russia, right, and the peoples, and you look at people's attitudes toward Russia, people's attitudes about the war, you will find, unfortunately, that the closer they are geographically to Russia, the more anti-Russian they are, and the more pro-Ukraine they are. Is that just a coincidence?
I think the Baltics are more pro-Ukraine than Ukraine itself.
The Baltics are completely off the wall about it, right? I mean,
those are the normies that benefit from empire. Like when you talk about the normies, who are the normies? Like the normies in the Rust Belt are going to understand that empire is evil because they've been screwed by it. And that's what I think a lot of people on the left don't understand, is that there was an entire population of working Americans that was going to be abandoned and eventually turned against neoliberalism. But the people I see as normies are actually the people that look the most avant-garde, and you look like they got attacked by a rack at a vintage store in the East Village. Like they all look different, but they all think the same because they all are benefiting from empire, and they are the Zoom class. They are the people who enjoyed lockdown. They are the people who loved the pandemic. And that's why it's so hard to reach them, and why those are the people we're going to be around if we're in a big city. It takes you 5 minutes to say anything to them because they're just going to reflexively oppose. Well, they're going to oppose pulling back from the system that they benefit from. And they'll virtue signal. They'll be like, defund the police or whatever, and they'll take up all kinds of social issues, but they're not going to address the core problem.
So even if people fanatically hate Russia, so what's the import of that? Then that means we have to have perpetual war with Russia? Is that what people want? And in Ukraine, that's long been a divided country. If you look at polls, the idea that the majority of the population there wants to have a conflict with Russia, supports the war in the Donbass, it's not borne out by polls. That's why, again, they had to overthrow a president who wasn't pro-Russia. He just wanted to be neutral. But he was popular. For all his problems, he was popular. But that's why he had to go, is because he just wanted to be neutral. And that that wasn't amenable to U.S. goals. So he had to go.
He wanted to trade with Russia. That's all he needed to do to get the ouster.
Sam.
Just a brief point. Highly inexact analogy, but yeah, the Kurds didn't like Saddam Hussein either, and they were used as the front people, to help sell the Iraq War. Totally illegitimate. Putin certainly isn't, doing terrible things to Eastern Europe now, but there is an animosity there. There is a fear of, the enormity of Russia. So it's understandable, but Russia's posture is largely a reaction to NATO again. So it's just an ancillary effect of the U.S.
But
as
if the
empire.
people of Europe, and it's both West and Eastern Europe, overwhelmingly, and I believe that's the case, it seems like, you were in Poland, Michael, it's something like 80 to 90%, I think, are pro-NATO and want to go hard on Russia. Like, what do we say to those people? Do you say...
I think the
Do
first
you
thing
want to have a war? Like, is that what you want?
No, but
do you want to have a war?
The first thing you have to not do is act like all their historical grievances are just totally delusional,
right,
or that they've been propagandized and there's no legitimate grounds on which to have some sort of antagonism toward the influence of Russia or the Soviet Union previously over their society. These are places that have been conquered by Stalin. What, do you think that was just a grand old time? Why pretend that this is all just like a concoction of their imaginations, that they have these worries or suspicions? Now, that can be separated. Once you acknowledge that, then I think you have an entry point to talk about how, right now, those grievances are being marshaled toward a cataclysmic end in exacerbating the warfare in Ukraine, potentially leading to nuclear war, etc. But you're not even going to make an inroad if you make it seem like they're all mistaken as to what life was like under in occupied Poland.
I think that's important. Max, and then let's
Next
go to
question.
another question. Yeah.
Next question.
Okay. Yep.
As a U.S. American, I want to recognize there are other Americans who have their opinion about U.S. imperialism and this war that's going on. And as a solution to what I see coming, I urge people to consider getting a residency in Paraguay to get outside the fallout plume. But in any event, back in the day, I was in the Marine Corps and I was in Russian area studies. And I'd like to share two sayings that I embraced. One is the difference between Americans and Russians. Americans believe their propaganda, Russians don't. And the other one is that Russians fear war and are prepared to fight one. Americans don't fear war and are not prepared to fight one. So I went to my congressman's town hall meeting. I come from an area where there's still old-timers that are mad about Custer and Sheridan. So there is some latent animosity even in American culture. And I went to the congressman's town hall meeting. He's a Republican in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And I got up and I asked a question. I pointed to all the Democrats there. I said, Jamie Raskin from Maryland gets up and says, we're in Ukraine to fight for the LGBT agenda. And I said, and you all eat that up and you're getting played. And then I said, turned to all the Republicans, and I'm a Republican, okay? So you can hate me if you want. But I said, all you veterans...
This is a safe space for you here.
Yeah, I'm the token right-winger here. All you Republicans, they tell you that Putin was in the KGB, and that means he's a commie, and you hate commies, and you want to kill commies. And they've been bifurcating these messages and keeping both groups kind of in lockstep. I don't know what the solution to that is. I don't know what you gentlemen have as an answer to that problem. I came here today because I want to have some conversations, because I want to try to convince these conservatives to stop being so pro-war.
I think what you did there is perfect. You demonstrated in a fair way that both sides are being propagandized and played in this cause. And I think that when you do it in that way, it may be more fruitful in terms of opening their mind and not putting them on a defensive posture. So I think you're handling it the best way you can with a short amount of time.
Yeah, and a lot of those conservatives, they're looking for a Yosemite Sam shoot down of those Chinese air balloons.
I would say that conservatives are actually, you have more fertile ground among conservatives than liberals.
Yeah, right now for sure.
There's actual conservatives who do oppose the war.
Now, to Mr. Tracey, could you answer one thing here? So I understand the argument is that the Russians under Article 51, when they recognize the two republics as independent countries, and this is provided for under, you can get into the morality of it, but I'm talking about the international law part. They recognize these two republics. The republics were being shelled. They had a defense pact with these, and they said, we're going to go in and defend these republics. That they actually tried to act legally within terms of international law. Can anybody address that? And thank you.
Well, they could make that argument. Well, if you want to appeal to international law, which I think is fictitious anyway, but if that's what you're trying to appeal to, then it would require a UN Security Council resolution to make the war, quote, legal, which of course they couldn't obtain because there's at least 2 or 3 members of the Security Council who would never have voted for anything that Russia
No, but there is
proposed
a
in that
conflict there. There is. There's a right to collective security, which is what he's talking about. That was invoked. I think listen, I think it's actually an interesting debate. Now, I have my own view on it, but I think it's debatable. And I'm not going to dismiss out of hand the Russian position. I think the burden is on Russia to show that there was no other alternative. And I don't think, to me, they haven't convincingly made that case. But also, they haven't really tried to make that case because I don't think they care anymore about appealing to Westerners. But I do think it's an interesting debate. And
have they made the case internally to Russians?
They have made the case to Russians, yeah.
That's why the war is
developed full way where they cite all the necessary.
The war is
for legal
popular in
justification.
Russia.
But in terms of the legal argument that he's talking about.
Yeah, that basically that
Do you mean did they go to a Russian court?
Well, he was talking specifically about a legal argument as to why it was legally
declared.
defensible.
Yeah, like the republics asked Russia for help. They signed a collective pact, and Russia says we're coming to their defense. Now, of course, I think Russia was very involved in orchestrating that.
Well, there you go.
But still, that did happen, and there is a tension there because there are people there. Their rights, their sovereignty, their rights were being violated, and they do have the right to self-defense. So to me, it's actually a really interesting issue, and I think it should be debated and discussed. And that's my position.
Just if I can plug a piece that I was at the State Department and I asked them about the International Criminal Court, and I asked them about South African Foreign Minister saying Israel should be targeted by the International Criminal Court, and they had always been saying Israel's not a signatory, it has no justification. They stopped saying that. Why did they stop saying that? Because they're trying, even though the U.S. isn't a party to the International Criminal Court, to apply it to Russia, and Russia has the same status as Israel. So, you know, the U.S. is attempting to use these legal machinations in a way that is so highly selective that it's insane. So
one quick point on the conservatives and pro-war position issue. I do think there are limits to emphasizing this point about how U.S. imperial hegemony today is just a tool to spread the LGBT agenda. You're going to get some conservatives inevitably who sign on to that and therefore oppose whatever the policy is that you're talking to them about, right? But I do think there's some limits there because what happens when some other ideological tendency is what's claimed as being promoted by the warfare state, right? I mean, is that going to apply to a potential Taiwan war with China? I mean, is that going to be claimed to just be about supporting LGBT?
But it's been a series of pretexts. Every good thing has been deformed. Disarmament or non-proliferation was deformed regarding Iraq. Human rights was deformed regarding Libya and Yugoslavia. Feminism was deformed regarding Afghanistan. So it's a litany of false international law now.
Right.
It's a litany of false pretexts that empire feeds off of repeatedly.
Right, but it wouldn't be an argument from false pretext to the conservatives. It would be that it's the true pretext, meaning that they're trying to spread LGBT rights in Ukraine, and that's why you should oppose the U.S. policy there.
That's why we need to say that Putin is gay.
Well, he's gay. That's true. That's proven.
For the conservatives,
he's flamboyantly gay too. It's pretty funny.
For when I'm trying to appeal to the conservatives, first I point out the propaganda.
Which is, by the way, that's mostly what you do. I mean, you're mostly working with the right wing on this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. I try and point out that the COVID narrative demonstrates that this country is under a massive psychological operation, and the fact that there's the Wuhan Institute of Virology and COVID arose from there, that can be used as a pretext for a war against China. However, when you consider the fact that it was EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak and the fact that Fauci through NIH was funding that, it's just very important that you try and cut them off at the pass because I think that the next PSYOP almost certainly will be a shift towards China, probably under Taiwan pretext or under COVID fallout pretext. I don't know which. So the real angle I take with them is the inflation we're suffering is a product of money printing, and it's a product of empire. I demonstrate that when I was born, our national debt was under $1 trillion. In '91, when the USSR fell, it was a little over $3 trillion, and it has 10x'd since then. If they are going to, I try and hit them on their own belief system. Do you believe in fiscal sanity at all?
Like, even if I can't get to them on a moral framework of, like, killing people sucks, then I just hit them on the finance side. Do you like your grocery bill being astronomical? Do you want to see the U.S. dollar's reserve currency status die? You know, that's the right-wing way of attacking the war issue, in my opinion.
Excellent. Next.
I thought this panel was boring and paranoid.
Thank you.
I agree.
I'd especially like to.
Sit down.
I'd especially like to hear.
Who are you with?
Security.
I'd like to hear from Aaron on this one, especially. Do you think, from a left-wing perspective, if we're measuring purely on net harm, that Donald Trump was one of the greatest presidents of all time? And is it important or harmful to say that? Also, Max, when's your next stand-up set in the New York area?
Magooby's
New York.
Oh, no, I don't know. We got to do a Gray Zone event, I think. Yeah, so I mean, this influences me, inspires me to try to plan something on our own. Maybe rent out a small theater in New York and do a live event with. We'll do like a live stream with me and Aaron, and maybe there'll be some comedy, and you all will come out, and we'll make sure we'll have a woman on stage, because as long as I'm still with my wife, we'll have a woman on stage. Thank you.
I do think that the harm that Trump did cause is underrated, because, for example, he tore up the INF Treaty, which is a big deal. That eliminated an entire class of offensive weapons between the U.S. and Russia, and Trump tore up that treaty, and I think that was a major cause of the proxy war in Ukraine. He also, sent weapons to Ukraine that Obama wouldn't send, and then, of course, in his defense, he froze them and then got impeached for it. And the coup he tried to launch in Venezuela was a hugely disastrous impact on the. He reversed the limited opening that Obama made toward Cuba. He did some really harmful things. The impunity he gave to Israel.
Iran too.
Bombed Syria twice.
He bombed Syria twice. Now this is Congress, but he imposed the Caesar sanctions on Syria. So yeah, it's true. In his defense, he didn't start any wars. He tried to start one maybe with Iran by killing Soleimani, but he didn't start any new wars. So comparing his harm to Obama's, Obama caused way more harm. And do I think? Look, I advocated a Biden victory because I thought that Biden would cause less harm than Trump. I was wrong. I was totally wrong. I thought Biden was going to get back into the Iran nuclear deal, and I thought that the fact that Biden was talking about nuclear treaties with Russia was an improvement over the Trump position. And again, this is not about Trump personally, because I think if it was up to him, I think probably the policy wouldn't have been not so bad. But the people he appointed were the worst neocons in the world: Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Elliot Abrams. So Nikki Haley. So, but certainly,
Korea.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, but even there, he did do something positive there, but he didn't go all the way with it. He didn't,
because Bolton was there.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to minimize. Like, I don't want to sort of hold him up as being like this fascist tyrant, the way that like the standard liberal narrative of him is. But from like an anti-war perspective, I think he did cause a lot of harm. But compared to Obama, yeah, if you're comparing those two, Obama did worse for sure.
I think it's very useful what Aaron just said.
Can I say one thing before we go that's important? Because our time is up. To your question about what do we teach the children, there are American traditions that can be taught that are just right there, that are not radical. This is the 60th anniversary of John F. Kennedy's speech at American University, warning of the costs of a Cold War. We should all read that speech today. He calls for us to reflect on our own warlike society, to create institutions of peace, and also to reflect on the position of the Soviet Union, and to engage in a real peace that is not enforced by a Pax Americana. And this was his speech talking up the test ban treaty that was later signed with his Secretary of State and Gromyko, the Soviet Foreign Secretary. It was a great example of the kind of diplomacy we need now, and it's something that can be taught because what he said is so true today, and we're so far from heeding that message, and it's not taught. That side of JFK is not taught. That's the side of JFK that had inspired already by that point several assassination attempts. The CIA was already campaigning against him there and in South Vietnam, and I just think I wish RFK Jr., his nephew, would deliver an address.
I'm going to ask Michael. I'm going to ask Michael not to start a new debate over the real legacy of JFK.
Let's go another hour. Let's go. No, that's later. So yes, if you have questions, we have to go now. I'm sorry. We have another panel coming in right now. My apologies to everyone for that. But we'll all be back tonight, so you can ask your questions then. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you later.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the Unreported News Analysis Show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.